everybody. Welcome to Bottom Line with Bob and Kendel Ehrlich. This week, it's another potpourri show.
Easy peasy.
Very, very excited about all of our topics. Of course, it gets a little depressing, as we all know where we are. Also,
First, though, up topic.
okay.
All right? College football crowds.
Yay. How fun was that to see?
Two prongs, however, on the upside. College football crowds, large, enthusiastic, the kids smiling, joyful. How cool was that?
It was great.
To watch the stands. And secondly, CNN was upset about it.
Well, clearly, there's two Americas in the fall. The Stadium America, unmasked, cheering their team, excited, kids, parents, bands, all of it. All of pro-Americano, by the way.
The pageantry of college football.
Exactly.
Keith Jackson.
Love it.
We love it. Everybody
age on
should
that,
love
Keith
it.
Jackson.
But here's the interesting thing. Well, wait a second.
No, I know. I can hear
You
his
grew up
voice
Keith
now.
Jackson,
I certainly
right?
can. but
Saturday afternoons with Keith Jackson. Now,
For our
here's
younger listeners.
Here's what's interesting to me, though, babe. Right now, you have these pennant races, full stadiums in San Diego, L.A., St. Louis, New York, Boston, all large crowds. White Sox are drawing huge crowds, and yet CNN has no problem with Major League Baseball. I suspect we're not going to see anything this weekend when the NFL stadiums are full, but they're just upset about college football.
Well, apparently they must not vote the right way.
College football fans?
Yes.
That appears to be the CNN bottom line.
Must be.
Anyway, and Dr. Fauci, we'll get into him more in a second. He tore into the full stadiums.
Well, we have a new variant, so they're all
Another
abuzz
one?
about the
It's
new
another
variant.
week. Yeah.
And then it'll be the next variant and the next.
Speaking of Dr. Fauci and potpourri, U.S. taxpayer dollars funding Wuhan lab has been a major point of contention. You'll recall the showdowns with Senator Rand Paul. You'll recall the emotionalism of Dr. Fauci when he denied U.S. taxpayer funds, helped fund this research. But it appears now, documents revealed this week, that there may be some truth to it, that NIH funds through this Echo Health Alliance were used in the Wuhan lab to support research into a SARS-related coronavirus. That's the charge. Dr. Fauci continues to deny it. A lot of folks in the right-wing media now say these documents are smoking gun type stuff.
Yeah.
So
If
we'll
that's
see where
the
this
case,
goes next.
he should be prosecuted. He should have disclosed that in the beginning. We might have been able to have a different strategy from the very beginning on this. Not to mention the whole entire world being made aware of this.
Well, in fairness, we need to see what he has to say with respect to these documents.
Please.
Well, listen. I'm no fan of Dr. Fauci, quite frankly, but
We've had enough
Let's
of
see
him.
where. Yeah, a lot of us have, but let's see where these new papers, this new quote unquote evidence leads. I want to see another face to face between Senator Paul and Dr. Fauci with regard to these particular documents. That's fair. Third potpourri item. Early midterm polling shows that President Biden's approval numbers are down. No shock there, especially in swing districts. We talk a lot about midterms, polling. We've been through this, God knows, coming out of the state legislature, running for Congress, getting elected in 94. We're familiar with the Washington establishment and the pollsters and the parties and the majority and the minority and the fundraising and all that. But we also know that for the most part, 85-90% of the seats in the House are relatively safe.
Right.
So when we talk about swing districts, we're talking about the 30, 40, 50, 60 swing districts where either party can win. So the polls in those districts count more, quite frankly. And in this case...
Same with the presidential election.
Yeah. What states? Yeah.
Right.
What states? Yeah, we know where 38, 40 states are going to end up right now, next time, right? Concerning issues, spending and taxes, interestingly, inflation, Afghanistan hurting the president, hurting the incumbent Democrats. No real surprise there. Build Back Better and $3.5 trillion in new spending may not be the winning message here from the president and the Democrats concerning the midterm elections. In any event, it's early. We remind everyone it's certainly early. We're talking about at least another year before the midterms. But right now, especially the impact of Afghanistan, we see hurting the Democrats in the midterm elections.
It's become a riskier world. We'll see.
No doubt about it. And then 9/11.
It's so unbelievable to think where we are now after 20 years.
Well, let's go
And
back
this is
20
where
years
we've
where we
ended.
were, because where I was at the White House as a member of the Majority Whip team that fateful morning. We had scheduled a meeting, the House Whips, our team, with the President and senior staff concerning the legislative agenda for the fall. You were
Home with Drew.
right? With our at that
My
time.
neighbor called me and said, "Have you seen what's happened?" I said, "No." And I turned on the TV and called your district director immediately and said, "Where are they? Where's everybody in the office?"
What's interesting is that in our meeting at the White House, when the first plane hit the first tower, they came in and told us, but the meeting went on because it was an accident. People thought it was an accident at the time. It was simply one of those horrific events that occurred. Nobody had any idea, it appears, at least in that room at that time, that we were at war. When the second plane hit, they came in and told us to get back to the Hill. We did. We raced back to the Hill. By the way, when we left the White House, total chaos at the White House. I remember outside as we ran to our cars, literally running to our cars. Back on Capitol Hill was total chaos as well. I sat with Steve Kraszewski, our chief of staff, talking about what we were supposed to do. There was no instruction. The Capitol Police came by the office and said, "Leadership just got out of here. Members, get out of here now. Now." So we let everybody, obviously, on staff go. I left.
I wonder where the people that have to fly home went. I guess, did they go to the airport?
I
or their
forgot. No,
own
they
homes,
didn't go to the airport because I'm sure the airport was shut down.
Right.
I do not recall. I just recall the Capitol Police directing us to get out of town immediately, and my scheduler, Terry Cox, and I left. My car broke down on the way home, you'll recall.
Well, and the traffic
Was
from D.C.
horrific.
on both sides, Baltimore, the
Bridges were shut down.
right, Baltimore and Virginia.
Long story short, I got home late afternoon to my crying wife on the curb. We sat outside and talked about the
future,
what
it looked like,
where we were going, the country, and that was 20 years ago. So just some personal recollections from 9/11. We'll do probably a 9/11 show in the near future with more substance concerning what went down, where the country was, what happened over the last 20 years. We're going to get to that more in a second, and where we are today. Concerning the latest news from Afghanistan, we want to get into Afghanistan here. I guess Afghanistan Part 3 would be the title of this show. Bagram Air Force Base report yesterday. China looking to study how to incorporate our Air Force base that we gave up.
How can we do that?
Overnight.
How can we do that?
Into its foreign investment program. Now, the Belt and Road Initiative is not well known in America. I have studied it a bit over the last couple of years. It is China's infrastructure initiative, if you will, to gain influence around the world in developing countries. They'll come in, they'll build your embassy, they'll build some of your infrastructure, they'll build whatever you need in return for influence. It's called the Belt and Road Initiative. It's been going on for years. It's well known, and it's
and
working.
Here we are, giving up our Air Force base.
Yeah, built by American taxpayer dollars. More embarrassment for America, more embarrassment for our military, more embarrassment for the Biden administration, more embarrassment for us. So, again,
it would have never happened under Trump.
They're
Ever.
not looking, by the way, to necessarily use it as an Air Force base. They're just looking at the Chinese, allegedly, according to the reports, on exactly how to use it. So, God knows. Second issue today, Taliban blocking charter flights out of Afghanistan. Now, the news this morning was some flights are actually getting through. And
for 200 more Americans to come.
Yeah, I thought all Americans were, there were 100 Americans left.
And there's still more than 200, and we're negotiating with them.
Well, negotiating in quotes, because I suspect there's dollars involved here, U.S. foreign aid involved here.
They already have all their equipment. They gave them enough.
Well, the Fox report, The State Department is not cooperating. I guess the flip side of this story, the State Department is not cooperating with the private efforts going on, the private campaigns going on to rescue not only Americans, but Afghani allies who are stranded in that country as well. If this is true, if this is truly the case that the United States State Department is not cooperating with Americans who are risking life, limb, and their own funds to rescue Americans and our allies, does it get much worse for the United States State Department? Is that... I'm without words here.
Well,
I am.
and let me
I'm
just
without
say,
words.
I'm going to defend the State Department amazingly because we don't know what the State Department is telling the White House, what the White House is doing in response. We don't know what the communications are. We have no idea who's pulling the strings.
The White House denies this. The bottom line here, though, is these flights need permission, i.e. State Department cooperation, to land in other countries. Without State Department cooperation gaining that approval, these flights will not take off from Afghanistan. Wow, that's a lot to chew on. Third Afghanistan-related news story. The Biden administration, according to reports in the mainstream media, the legacy media, if you will, is considering whether to recognize the Taliban government as a legitimate government of Afghanistan. I guess we're negotiating with them. We're giving them names. We're probably going to give them money. And I suspect some sort of recognition will follow, which is just, again...
I'll tell you, Americans are going to really resent on 9/11 him trying to take some victory lap for ending the war on terror because it is not over.
Well, a new chapter just began.
And he is solely responsible, in my view.
So that leads us to, we could go on to other new storylines concerning Afghanistan, but I really want to get back to a point we made in our previous show, which was, although it's early, there needs to be some retrospective here. And you and I discussed very briefly 4 elements of that retrospective. 1, optimistic forecast, overly optimistic forecasts in the past. 2, congressional oversight, or in this case, lack of congressional oversight in the past. 3, the issue of Afghan buy-in, or lack thereof, over the past 20 years. And 4, the nature of limited wars, which is the point we really want to stress in this show over the next few minutes. So let's...
we really didn't learn much from Vietnam on that last point.
Well, hold that. We'll
Okay.
get to that in a second because I want to go over each one in a little deeper dig here. The first is overly optimistic forecasts. Clearly, again, Vietnam, your point.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about this a bit last show. The body counts, Walter Cronkite every night. We killed 2,000 of them. We lost 50 guys, 100 guys, and it's 20-to-1 ratio, and boy, we're going to win this war. And the American public was fed that until the Tet Offensive, which we won, but the press interpreted it as a loss, and that really gave fuel to the anti-war movement in the United States. So here we are. These forecasts came from observers, came from politicians, it came from generals, bipartisan in nature, leading the American public to think that we were making progress in Afghanistan. Real progress was being made. A lot of hubris, a lot of optimism, especially after don't forget, we won the war.
Right, exactly.
Our special ops in the Northern Alliance won and defeated the Taliban.
That's
so now
correct.
we're talking about the last 19 years because the war was won. In any event, winning the war was far easier than reinventing a culture, a point we're going to get to in number 4 here. But again, it's just the fact of it. Secondly, poor and negligent oversight. There are 2 issues here. One is the lack of congressional oversight over these decades with respect to U.S. taxpayer dollars. How the money was being spent, where it's being spent, what constitutes success.
Why
with
we have
respect
all
to
those helicopters
dollars.
sitting over there.
Well, that's but I'm talking about the nation building issue here, quite
Okay.
frankly. So, what occurred here, as we recall, over the past 20 years, our eyes were taken off of Afghanistan. Our eyes were refocused on Syria and Iraq, and domestic issues, and the Trump election, and 50 other things you could mention. This is especially true, and this is just human nature. It's American human nature. We are not conquerors. Whenever we win a war, the first question is, even before we win, when are we leaving? When are we coming home? America is the worst imperialist country in the world because as soon as we do something, we want to get out.
Which is good, but we don't get out right away.
Well, yeah.
That's the problem.
That's the nature of limited war. We're going to get to that. Especially true with regard to U.S. casualties. When U.S. casualties are down, when U.S. casualties are not in the headlines, the attention of the American people tends to leave, correct? To diminish. This is especially true with endless wars. We'll get to that, as I said, in a second. This is a bipartisan criticism, by the way, this negligent oversight. We took our eye off the ball. Politicians took their eye off the ball. The government took their eye off the ball. Especially Congress took their eye off the ball.
The Pentagon.
Everyone took their eye off the ball, including the American public, because this was not a major issue as U.S. casualties diminished. We have a friend, a great friend of ours who loves to do research. He sent me this information. I have not checked it out, but I believe him. He's very good. So, and this goes to the oversight issue. You would have thought over the last month, 2, 3, 6, given the Trump administration's peace negotiations, given the quote-unquote deal struck with the Taliban, the Afghan government, that oversight would have increased, right?
You'd think. They're too busy.
Our buddy sent us some interesting news here. The House Foreign Affairs Committee has had 91 hearings since April 2 in Afghanistan. As Afghanistan was imploding, hearings focused on climate change and something called transnational white identity terrorism.
There we go.
There you go.
For them, that's the biggest threat, I'm sure.
And then news of this past week. Bo Burdog, remember him?
Yes.
4 of the 5 detainees from the Burdog exchange negotiated by the Obama-Biden administration now hold senior positions in the Taliban government. Life comes full circle, hey? What do you think?
All I know is that our voters are feeling much less secure and now say that they feel that there will be another attack. And that hasn't been for years that we've thought that.
Well, and again, part of this is a function of lack of oversight, lack of attention, lack of eyeballs, lack of energy from the United States government.
And if it were a President Trump, they wouldn't be as fearful of some attack happening here, or they'd be very fearful of the consequences of that attack.
They feared Reagan, cowboy,
right.
Crazy. They feared Bush, cowboy, crazy. They really feared Trump, cowboy, crazy, right? Element 3, poor Afghan buy-in. This is a deep dig issue, and we don't have time to get into it in great detail today, but when you look at what the generals have written, and there's been some retrospective articles written over the past week or two by American military leaders, and we've seen some, and we've also read over the past couple of years, we have personal friends who've been involved here in leadership positions as well. Concerning Afghanistan, too much corruption, lack of literacy within the population really hurt buy-in.
And I think people don't realize that.
Of course not. When you can't communicate your vision to hundreds of thousands of trainees, you might have the best army, which we do in the world. We might have the best trainers in the world. But if the trainees do not share any part of your culture or your language or your value system, you're going to have a problem. Too much Taliban infiltration in the army, police, and within the culture. Also very difficult. And then finally, weak Afghan civilian leadership. All these elements combined, and I would add a fifth, we've talked about it, the fact that the Trump administration did not emphasize Afghani government buy-in concerning the peace negotiations with the Taliban. I think that's a legitimate criticism of the Trump administration. When you add all this together, it shows that the issue, the element of Afghan civilian buy-in was never strong, despite these overly optimistic forecasts we talked about in issue 1.
And that's way too much to overcome, to sort of create a democracy out of a third world country with those limitations.
And by the way, there's another issue that runs throughout the literature: corruption.
Right.
A culture of corruption. So when you combine all these elements, difficult to get buy-in that you need when you are not the invading army, but you're supposed to be the saving army, and you're supposed to be at least the foundational elements of a civil society.
And the trainer.
Which leads me to number 4, which is the real point here. We've made this point a bit in the last show, but I really want to dig down here. Limited wars. Beware overreach. Beware nation building. We talked about tribal society, Western values, tough marriage, very tough marriage. It means that nation building literally never has a chance if you don't start with any sort of firm foundation concerning those values. When we rebuilt under the Marshall Plan, Europe, we were dealing with educated societies.
People of similar values.
Well, at one point, yeah.
Right.
They went off track there pretty good in
Well,
World War II. But,
I meant.
Yeah, right. But not tribal societies.
Right, not tribal.
Right. Developed
Countries, Western countries.
Right. Limited war means...
Where we haven't been successful in Vietnam and Afghanistan, in places that the culture's very, very different.
Yep.
And it's very hard to develop that.
So limited wars in tribal venues do not create permanent alliances. That's one of the major takeaways. And we knew that. In such circumstances, ties are okay. We've used this word ties, and I think it's a legitimate term here. We lost track of the fact that, and part of this was Republican criticism as well, no more endless wars, no more endless wars, no more endless wars, bring the troops home. Okay, but what did you accomplish? What did all that blood and accomplish? What did all those dollars accomplish? It accomplished a tie, which beats a loss, which in the last couple of years had kept American troops safe off the casualty list and kept America safe, no more terror attacks.
Right. I mean, now look, by pulling out completely without having us there to stabilize the region and have some sort of fear with the Taliban, it's completely gone and wiped out.
Yeah.
And America is feeling all that time and money now for what? It's even worse than, to be able to get home fast, get home now.
Speaking of which, thank you. You led me to my last point here, because this point has been terribly undervalued, terribly underanalyzed. From the literature, and we saw this in Vietnam, it was a year rotation. Survive a year, you're out. Too frequent rotations in long, extended, partial wars lead to that sort of mentality. Just let me get my 365 days and I'm out of here. This also, by the way, extends to the leadership, the military leadership, where they're rotating generals. Commanding generals in and out. That does not give rise to a sense of consistent approach nor consistency with regarding policy and the troops and the leadership and everything that we know. So, again, too frequent rotations combined with an over-optimistic evaluation periodically, combined with the nature of the tribal society we were, quote-unquote, dealing with, combined with poor Afghan buy-in for lots of reasons we've articulated, meant that we were never going to be truly successful. Limited war, limited circumstances, limited goals were met. But again, all now gone because of policy decisions made by politicians, not by generals. The generals in our system must follow civilian leadership. That's part of our magic. In this case, it was not the White House saying, okay, generals, what do we do? It was, we're going to dictate the predicate to you. We're leaving. We're giving up the Air Force Base overnight. We're doing this. We're going to protect the embassy. We're taking our troops out. Now, given that, all those elements, what do we do? That is not the fault of the generals. That was a function of political decisions made by the White House, by the president, and then the generals were given very limited options. So here we go. This is as far as we go with regard to this show. We're going to have more in Afghanistan in future shows because it literally is the issue of the day in America today. We haven't gotten at all into the impact on foreign policy, our allies. We've talked about this again in the past. Other commentators, other shows are addressing that issue as well. It is a big-time issue because our allies today are not trusting us to be there if needed. The issue of Taiwan.
Yeah, this issue is not ending anytime soon. And this week in particular, I think we are thinking of and praying for the families who lost loved ones in New York that day and Washington that day, and to think about the 20 years of casualties and people that really gave their whole life, including those from Afghanistan, all the interpreters and everyone. We're thinking of you. We're praying for you. We're thankful. And we really can't ever forget. And I think people in America right now are worried about us forgetting 9/11.
Their sacrifice bought us 20 years of peace here. Thank you. And you are in our prayers. But I did want to send out a shout out to Auburn University. Going back to the football and Afghanistan. Auburn had 13 empty seats at their first game in remembrance of our soldiers killed in Afghanistan week before last. Good for Auburn. Americans need to do that. Americans need to recognize sacrifice. We're still rich. We're still wealthy. We're still lazy. And right now we're paying the price. But there are people who volunteer to go in harm's way to allow us to live this lifestyle we live in. And good for Auburn in recognizing that sacrifice.
And there's a price to pay for freedom. Freedom really matters for those that hate America so much.
So that's it, folks. Thanks for listening. We try not to be too Debbie Downer these days, but it's difficult to be optimistic. But this too shall pass. We need to get our act together. We need to, as a country, understand what went down. Republicans, Democrats, right, left, I don't care what you are. We need to understand we're better than this, and we need to do better than this as well.
Thanks, everybody. Please go to BobEhrlich.com and check out this podcast and Western Journal articles and other things, all Bob Ehrlich. Thanks, everybody.
Godspeed.